The dog came in through the emergency entrance on a Thursday morning, and Brianna Soleil was the only one who moved. He was a German shepherd, massive, tactical vest still strapped to his torso, one front leg dragging at an angle that made her stomach clench. His handler was right behind him, a young corporal named Deschaines, still in full uniform, blood on his sleeve that didn't belong to him. The dog, his name was stenciled on the vest, Storm, collapsed the moment he crossed the threshold onto the linoleum, and the sound he made was low and exhausted, like something that had been holding on for a very long time and had finally decided it didn't have to anymore. Brianna was 29. She had been a registered nurse at Hôpital Sainte Marguerite in Gatineau for 3 years. She knew the protocols. She knew what she was and was not authorized to do. She also knew that a living creature was bleeding out on the floor of the admitting area and that no one else was moving, and that she could not stand there and watch that happen. She knelt beside Storm and put her hands on him. "He needs triage," she said to no one in particular. "He's got a puncture wound to the left forelimb, possibly femoral involvement. He needs compression, and he needs it right now." Corporal Deschaines crouched beside her, jaw tight. "We couldn't get him to the vet clinic in time." "The nearest one." "I know," Brianna said. "It's okay. Just talk to him. Keep him calm." She didn't wait for permission. She never had been good at that. She grabbed a supply cart from the wall. The basic emergency cart kept near admitting for exactly these kinds of first moments, and she worked. Gloves, gauze, pressure. Storm's dark eyes tracked her face the entire time, wary but not aggressive. Deschaines murmured to him in French, low and steady, the way you talk to someone you love when you're terrified. It took Brianna 4 minutes to get the bleeding under control. 4 minutes. She was still on her knees when the doors to the administrative corridor swung open. Director Paulette Renaud walked in like she owned every square centimeter of the building, which in every practical sense she did. She was 61, steel-haired, and operated on a philosophy that could be summarized in 3 words: liability, protocol, optics. She had once sent a memo reminding staff that personal expressions of emotion in patient-facing areas were discouraged. Brianna had kept that memo. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she'd always known she'd need it someday. Renaud stopped, took in the scene, the dog, the soldier, the nurse on the floor with blood on her gloves, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not concern, calculation. Nurse Soleil. Her voice was perfectly level. "This is not a veterinary facility." Brianna looked up from what she was doing. "I'm aware of that. Then you understand that what you're doing is a violation of our patient care mandate, our equipment usage policy, and our liability framework." He was dying. He is a dog. The waiting room had gone very quiet. An elderly man in the corner had lowered his newspaper. A woman with a toddler on her lap had stopped bouncing her knee. Corporal Deschaines was very still. "He is a working military animal," Brianna said, keeping her voice even, "who sustained an injury in the line of service. He will survive this. I'd like to finish stabilizing him." "You will stop what you are doing," Renaud said, "and you will do it now." Brianna looked at Storm. His breathing had steadied. The bleeding had slowed significantly. He needed more than she could do here. He needed surgery. He needed imaging. He needed a proper veterinary facility, but he was not going to die in the next 10 minutes anymore. She'd made sure of that. She stood up slowly, peeled off her gloves, dropped them in the waste receptacle. "Fine," she said. Renaud held the door to the administrative wing open. "My office now." The conversation was short, briefer than Brianna had expected, though she supposed she shouldn't have been surprised. Renaud was not interested in context. She was not interested in the fact that Storm was alive because of what Brianna had done, or that Corporal Deschaines had been on the verge of watching his partner die in front of him, or that the whole thing had taken less time than most people's coffee breaks. She was interested in the breach, the protocol violation, the optics of a nurse on the floor of admitting treating a dog with hospital supplies. "You'll be given the opportunity to surrender your badge voluntarily," Renaud said from behind her desk, "or I will initiate formal termination proceedings effective immediately." "Given the severity, I'll take the formal proceedings," Brianna said. "I'd like it on record." Renaud's expression didn't change. "Clear your locker. Security will escort you out." Brianna had worked at Sainte Marguerite for 3 years and 4 months. She'd held the hands of people who were dying and the hands of people who were terrified they were dying, and sometimes those were different things. She'd worked double shifts during the winter surge 2 years running. She'd covered for colleagues, mentored new grads, learned the names of every orderly on the night shift because she thought it mattered that people felt known. She packed her locker in 11 minutes. She knew because she watched by the clock. It was the kind of detail your brain latches onto when the rest of it is trying very hard not to fall apart. The security guard, a young man named Patrick who she'd always liked, walked her to the staff exit without meeting her eyes. He handed her a plastic bag with her jacket and her spare pair of shoes and the framed photo from her locker, the one of her and her sister at Lac Philippe the summer before last, both of them laughing at something that was already half forgotten. "I'm sorry," Patrick said very quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong," she told him. She walked out into the October air and stood on the pavement and felt, more than anything, the particular cold clarity that comes when something enormous has just happened and your body hasn't caught up yet. Her car was in the staff lot. She had her keys. She'd thought to grab them, unlike the character in whatever story this felt like it was becoming. She had her wallet, her phone, her jacket. She had nothing else. She sat in the car for a while without starting it. She thought about Storm. She hoped he'd made it to a vet clinic. She hoped Deschaines had found someone to help him. She thought about the look on the old man's face in the waiting room, that particular expression that people get when they're witnessing something that confirms a fear they've had for a long time about the way the world works. She drove home to her apartment in Hull and made tea and didn't cry, which surprised her a little. She'd expected to cry. Instead, she called her sister. "They fired you," Marisol said when Brianna finished explaining. Not a question. Just the shape of the thing, spoken aloud to make it real. "They fired me for saving a dog, for using hospital supplies without authorization on a non-human patient." A pause. "Brianna, I know. You're going to be okay. I know that too." She didn't sleep well. She lay in the dark and ran through it all again. The weight of Storm's leg in her hands, the sound of Deschaines's voice, Renaud's face, the cold air on the pavement. And somewhere around 3 in the morning she thought, I would do it again. That thought was both comforting and exhausting, because it meant there was no version of this where she'd made a different choice. And there was no version of this where the outcome was different either, and she was going to have to figure out what to do with that. She didn't know yet that the outcome was about to change. The call came at 9:30 the next morning. Blocked number. She almost didn't answer. "Is this Brianna Soleil?" The voice was male, professional, with the kind of precision that doesn't come from a call center. "It is. My name is Major Fortin. I'm calling from CFB Petawawa. I understand you provided emergency stabilization to a military working dog yesterday at Hôpital Sainte Marguerite in Gatineau." She sat up straighter on her couch, still in yesterday's clothes. "I did. I understand you were subsequently terminated." "I was." A pause that felt deliberate. "I see. And Storm, the animal in question, is currently recovering at the base veterinary facility. The attending veterinary surgeon has indicated that the compression work done on-site almost certainly prevented a fatal hemorrhage." Another pause. "I wanted you to know that." Something loosened in her chest. "Thank you. I appreciate you telling me. I'd also like to tell you that I'll be making some calls today." His voice was still even, still professional, but there was something underneath it now. As a matter of personal interest, she didn't quite know what to say to that. "Okay. Have a good morning, Nurse Soleil." He hung up. She stared at her phone for a long time. The next 36 hours were strange. She applied for 3 jobs, 2 in Ottawa, 1 across the river in Aylmer, because she couldn't afford not to. She talked to her union rep, a brisk woman named Tremblay, who listened carefully and said the wrongful dismissal case had merit but would take time. She ate soup for dinner both nights because it was what she had, and she wasn't particularly motivated to go to the grocery store. She watched a lot of the kind of television you don't have to think about. On Saturday morning, she was standing at her window with her coffee, watching the frost on the parking lot, when her phone lit up again. Local number this time. "Nurse Soleil?" A woman's voice, younger, slightly out of breath. "My name is Corporal Nadeau. I'm with the Joint Task Force Public Affairs Office. I'm calling because there's something happening at Sainte Marguerite right now, and we thought you should know about it." Brianna set down her coffee very carefully. "What kind of something?" "The kind with a lot of uniforms," Nadeau said. "Major Fortin asked me to call you directly. He said you'd probably want to see this. She got in the car without entirely deciding to. The drive from Hull to St. Marguerite took 14 minutes on a Saturday. She made it in 11. She wasn't sure why she was hurrying. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. What she found was this: 7 vehicles in the main parking lot, 3 of them military. A cluster of personnel near the main entrance, uniformed, official, unhurried in the way that people are unhurried when they know they hold every card in the room. 2 of them were what she later understood to be special operations people. Though they weren't in the kind of tactical gear that makes that obvious, they had a particular quality of stillness that you either recognized or you didn't. And in the middle of all of it, standing with a clipboard and a very specific expression on his face, was Major Fortin himself. He was in his 50s, compact, with close-cropped gray hair, and the posture of someone who'd been doing difficult things for a long time and had stopped finding them surprising. He spotted her crossing the parking lot and walked to meet her. "You came," he said. "You said there were uniforms." Something in his face shifted just slightly. Director Renault is currently having a conversation with the hospital board, the Regional Health Authority's ethics officer, and 2 legal representatives from the Department of National Defense. The conversation concerns, among other things, the obligations of publicly funded health institutions toward military working animals during emergency presentations, the appropriate scope of discretionary clinical judgment, and the employment rights of the nurse who apparently saved Storm's life yesterday. Brianna was quiet for a moment. The frost had melted off the pavement by now, and the October sun was doing its best, and the parking lot smelled like cold air and exhaust and somewhere distant coffee. "That's a lot of conversation," she said. "It is," Fortin agreed. "It will likely conclude with a formal recommendation from the health authority regarding the termination decision." He paused. "I want to be transparent. I can't promise you any particular outcome. What I can tell you is that the people in that building right now are not inclined to let this stand, and that Storm's commanding officer is one of them, and that he is not a man who uses words like unacceptable lightly." "What did he say?" "He said that a nurse who runs toward a dying animal when no one else moves is exactly the kind of person a functioning institution should want on its staff, and that a director who fires her for it is exactly the kind of person a functioning institution should be questioning." Fortin's expression remained neutral. "He said some other things as well. I'll spare you the vocabulary." Brianna laughed before she meant to. It came out a bit unsteady, which was fair. They stood in the parking lot together for a while. She didn't ask him to brief her further, and he didn't volunteer more detail. There was something comfortable about the silence, the kind that exists between people who have been in emergency situations and know how to wait. Inside the building, through the glass doors of the main entrance, she could see activity. People moving with purpose. A woman in a blazer, the ethics officer, maybe, walking briskly with a sheaf of papers. A man in uniform standing near the reception desk with his arms crossed, not aggressively, just solidly, in the way that makes it clear he's prepared to stand there indefinitely. Her phone buzzed. "Marisol, are you okay? I heard something is happening." She texted back, "I'm in the parking lot." "Of the hospital?" "Yeah, 3 seconds. "Of course you are." She put her phone away. The doors opened at 11:47. She knew the time because she'd been checking intermittently, the way you do when you're waiting for something and you're not sure how to hold the waiting. The woman in the blazer came out first, spoke briefly to one of the uniformed personnel, then disappeared back inside. Fortin's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression didn't change, exactly, but something in his posture settled. "The board has voted to rescind the termination," he said, "pending a formal review of the hospital's emergency triage protocols, specifically regarding military working animals. Director Renault will be placed on administrative leave while circumstances of your dismissal are investigated." Brianna heard the words. She let them move through her. "Storm," she said, "is he actually going to be okay?" Fortin looked at her for a moment, and she had the impression he was recalibrating slightly, adjusting to the fact that this was, in fact, the first thing she'd asked. "He came through surgery yesterday afternoon," he said. "Full recovery expected. His handler hasn't left the facility." She nodded. "Good." That was what mattered first. Everything else, the job, the vindication, the formal review, the particular satisfaction of watching a person who had used the word liability as a substitute for conscience face some consequences. All of it was real, and she would feel it later. She already felt it, underneath, the way you feel warmth spreading back into fingers you didn't realize had gone cold. But the dog was alive. That was where it had started. That was what she'd chosen when she'd knelt on the floor of admitting and put her hands on him without waiting for permission. Forden walked her back to the main entrance. The people in uniforms nodded to her as she passed, not elaborately, just acknowledgement, the kind that meant we know what you did and it registered. One of the special operations men, the one who had barely moved in the past 2 hours, met her eyes as she passed. He gave her a single nod, economical, sufficient. Inside, the admitting area looked the same as it always had. Beige walls, linoleum floor, the squeak of a supply cart somewhere down the corridor. A new nurse was behind the reception desk, someone Brianna didn't recognize, maybe a weekend casual, and she looked up briefly and then back down at her screen. The ethics officer was waiting just inside. She introduced herself as Dr. Beaumont Lacasse, extended a hand, gave Brianna the specific kind of handshake that means, "I've read your file, and I think the file is wrong. We'll need you to come in early next week for a formal reinstatement meeting," she said. "There will be some paperwork, there's always paperwork, but I want to be clear that we take this situation seriously and that the board's decision today reflects that." "I appreciate it," Brianna said. "I also want to say," Beaumont Lacasse paused, with the manner of someone choosing words carefully rather than defaulting to the diplomatic ones, "that what you did in this room 2 days ago was noticed. Not just by the military, by the people who work here. I've had 3 separate staff members contact my office this morning, independently, to describe what they observed. The word they kept using was instinct." A pause. "I think that matters." Brianna thought about Patrick the security guard, walking her to the staff exit and not meeting her eyes. She hoped someone had told him. She thanked Beaumont Lacasse and walked back through the admitting area, past the spot on the floor where Storm had collapsed, past the wall where the emergency cart was parked, and out through the staff entrance, because that was where her feet took her, the familiar route. The October sun was direct now, no longer apologetic. The parking lot had warmed up. She stood for a moment in it, face tilted up slightly, letting herself breathe. Her phone rang. Deschênes, Nurse Soleil. His voice was rough at the edges. "I heard what happened this morning. How's Storm?" A sound that was half exhale, half something else. "He was walking this morning. Not far, but he was walking." She closed her eyes. "Good. I wanted to. I don't know how to." He stopped. Started again. "They told me what you did after they took you out. I didn't know it was that bad, what they did to you. I should have." "You were with your dog," she said. "That's where you should have been." A long pause. "He's going to have a scar on that leg. The vet says it won't affect his work capacity. But he's going to carry it. So will I," she said, and she meant it in a way that wasn't entirely sad. "There are some things you carry because they cost you something real, and the cost is evidence of what you valued, and that's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing." She walked to her car. She got in. She sat for a moment before starting the engine, same as she had 2 days ago, but it was a different kind of sitting, less like coming to a stop, more like pausing before something continues. She pulled out of the parking lot and turned toward home, and the city moved around her the way it always did on a Saturday, ordinary, ongoing, indifferent to the private seismic events that happen every day inside its buildings and parking lots, and the lives of people who just keep showing up and doing the next right thing, even when no one is watching, even when someone is watching, and wishes they'd stop. Brianna Soleil drove home with her jacket on the passenger seat and the window down a crack because the air was good, and she thought about Monday and the paperwork and Storm walking that morning on a leg that had almost not made it, and she thought, yes, okay, that's enough. That's everything.